And welcome back to the lunchroom. And we're very pleased to have with us, joining us from, I believe, maybe his home or his office, wherever he may be, in Dennery North. He is the Member of Parliament for Dennery North. Is heading into another election, and I'm sure hoping to be re-elected for that constituency, the Honourable Shawn Edward. How are you doing, sir?
Good afternoon, colleagues. I am doing well. You called it correctly. I am in Dennery North as we speak, and it's always a pleasure to join you on your program. It is one of the most listened to programs in the country at the moment, especially at this time of day. And I think you've done such a wonderful job in terms of informing the wider St. community in terms of the things that are happening in the country, and also educating them on some of the things that we probably take for granted, but things that have serious implications for the development of our country. I also want to say good afternoon to your listeners at home, those in the diaspora as well, and permit me to say a very special good afternoon to my constituents of Dennery North.
Indeed. And how's the weather over in Dennery North today? It's positive?
It's a bit mixed. We had a light shower this morning. It's a bit overcast. So it has been a tussle from, say, about 10 o'clock between the sun and the clouds. But in the main, I think we can say we have good weather. Whatever weather we get, Calix, is something that we would always embrace. As you know, a lot of families in Dennery North still resort to the farm on a daily basis to earn a livelihood. So given the weather we had last week, where it was a bit dry and we were beginning to see the water sources being depleted, I'm sure the farmers would welcome the shower we got earlier today.
And an improved water supply, that is, I believe, improvements at the Tunis intake, and a lot of investments being made thanks to the government of Mexico providing a lot of support. That has benefited a number of people in the Mabria Valley.
Absolutely, Calix. Some of the anxieties I would have had moving into the dry season, I must tell you, those have been allayed. And I'm looking forward to a dry spell with a lot of confidence in terms of our ability to withstand whatever pressures that would have been placed on the constituency as it relates to an adequate supply of water. I visited the intake very recently. I can tell you there's a lot of water in storage, and some of the problems that we would have experienced or encountered a few years ago, I think those are behind us. And as I said, we're looking forward to a dry spell where some of the disruptions and interruptions we would have been accustomed to would definitely be things of the past. But that having been said, I still believe we have a responsibility to use water wisely. Do not waste the water, because it's costing government some money to keep the plant operational, and it is also costing money to ensure that the service is provided on a 24-hour basis. So yes, we have supply in abundance, but we still have a responsibility to use water very discreetly and to ensure that there's no wastage at all.
Now, a slightly younger Shawn Edward became the island's Minister for Youth Development and Sport back in 2011. And, of course, you held that position for about 4.5 years. And tell us a little bit about that experience, handling a ministry that is sometimes seen as perhaps not necessarily forgotten, but as almost a sort of a junior ministry. Tell us about that experience.
Yes, Calix, the ministry is, or should I say, the Department of Youth Development and Sports was always seen as a junior portfolio in the wider scheme of government. And given the fact that I probably was the youngest in the configuration of the cabinet at the time, I think that was a label that I did not really have any difficulty with. But in terms of the mandate of the ministry and what that particular department of government is responsible for, I don't know that it is junior, because I think sports and youth development are critical aspects or areas of national development that must be funded, that must get resources to ensure that we give young people avenues to realize their potential. What was very interesting and very profound in 2011, when the St. Lucia Labour Party formed the government, is the fact that the portfolios of youth development and sports were no longer appendages to more established ministries. Prior to us coming in 2011, under the UWP administration, the configuration was social transformation, youth, and sports. And of course, a lot of emphasis was placed on social transformation. Even in the previous Labour Party administration, it used to be the Ministry of Education, Human Resource Development, Youth, and Sports. And for a while, some of us in the sports fraternity were of the view that, again, the emphasis was on education and human resource development. And to try and correct that, in the previous Kenny Anthony administration, the department was given a bit of autonomy by Dr. Anthony at the time, assigning a permanent secretary who would have handled specifically youth development and sports. But he took it one step further in 2011 when, as I said, we were given full autonomy as a department of government, and we were known as the Ministry of Youth Development and Sports, as opposed to being a department in a much broader ministerial configuration. And I think that was profound. We had our own permanent secretary, we had our own accounts department, and we were able to make things happen. And I think that is responsible in part, or in large measure, should I say, for a lot of the successes we were able to register between 2011 and 2016.
Now, of course, generally speaking, people consider that a department like Youth Development and Sport is a social agency, a social ministry, because you're dealing with people's lives and practices, lifestyle, culture, perhaps to a certain extent. But, of course, there is that other dynamic which has been pushed over the years, that of sports tourism. And, of course, we're now hearing from the St. Lucia Labour Party about this whole concept of youth economy. How successful do you think has it been thus far in terms of realizing and recognizing that economic potential for sport, for instance?
Khalid, I still believe we have a long way to go. When you look at the economic impact of sports on an economy or on a country, there are different angles from which you can look at it. There are those who believe in hosting international events, and if you're going to bring CPL and international cricket and things of that sort to St. Lucia, the hotels stand to benefit, especially given these days that some of the international teams for cricket in particular, when England tours the Caribbean or England tours St. Lucia, for that matter, the number of visitors who come, I mean, that would impact the hotel stock tremendously. Taxi drivers benefit, vendors benefit, the souvenir shops benefit, etc. So from that standpoint, the benefits are there for all to see. But there are other persons who look at it differently and tell you that the real economic impact of sports is when you have your own athletes, be it in cricket, football, being able to penetrate the international market and make it big,
right.
Thereby giving credence to your country's name and the marketing efforts that would probably be undertaken by the tourism authority and other such agencies. So it doesn't matter how you look at it, there are untold benefits that can be derived from investment in sports. For me, I believe as much as possible, it is important for us to be great hosts. It is important for our name to be resonating regionally and even internationally as host of international cricket and things of that sort. But ultimately for me is in any sports program in a country, it ought to be a situation where avenues are being created for young people to realize their potential. I have made the point in Parliament, I've made the point in the cabinet that I was a part of, that St. Lucia is a very, very rich repository of sporting talent, and the evidence is all around us. But I don't know as a country that we've done sufficient to create the avenues that would cause young St. Lucians to express their talent in ways that would capture people in the international market and to cause them to make it big. We have had a few successes, but I believe we could have had a lot more than what we've been able to realize. And
of course, Darren Sammy perhaps being that big one out there, big name in certainly in the East, in Pakistan, I believe where he's at right about now. He can perhaps be considered a hero, a celebrity over there. But of course, that point that you're making, being able to generate and create these really high-end athletes, we certainly have not had a great history in being able to achieve it, say, as compared to maybe Jamaica, which has done a phenomenal job, especially in the area of athletics, for instance, and of course in cricket.
Yeah, that's correct. One thing you'll observe, Calix, is that the majority of athletes, irrespective of sporting discipline, who have made it big and have become global superstars from the Caribbean, they would have had stints away from home, be it in the US, in the UK. You look at Arthur Bolden, you look at, well, Usain Bolt is probably the exception.
Mm-hmm.
You take, for instance, Obadiah Thompson from Barbados. You look at people like Vivian Richards and Desmond Haynes. In the 1980s, they were regulars on the county circuit playing in England, basically refining their skills and keeping their rhythm. So anytime they were needed for international assignments for the West Indies cricket team, they were coming into the team, of course, with a lot of games and a lot of experience under their belt, and that was partly responsible for the formidable unit that the West Indies cricket team was in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s. So I say this to say that sometimes, after you've recognized that a talent has the potential to become elite, sometimes it is in the interest of the athlete and the country as a whole to basically put things in place that would cause that particular talent to be nurtured overseas until such time we have the facilities, we have the culture, and we have the expertise that would cause such talent to blossom, to become world-class and dominate in their respective fields. We had a situation not too long ago with a young lady from the Leoness Comprehensive School, Julian Alfred. She was at Hess and she was basically dominating the inter-house competition. She was dominating the secondary school track and field championship. And an opportunity came for her to transition from Leoness to St. Catherine High in Jamaica. Now, you know, Jamaica has a very, very rich sprinting culture. And so when the opportunity came for Julian to have moved from Leoness to St. Catherine High in Jamaica, we did whatever was necessary to facilitate that particular move, because we understood at the time that in a Jamaican setup, she probably would have benefited more than what was being offered to her down here. And that is not in any way saying that the coaches we have down here do not have the expertise, but the coaches alone cannot cut it. At the Minifili Park, she was running on grass. In Jamaica, she was running on synthetic surfaces and things of that sort. So what was important is that we as a government, provided assistance. We were basically making $150 available to her on a monthly basis, which translated to almost 20,000 Jamaican dollars a month. And Calix, you wouldn't believe that when the government changed in 2016, I was the subject of an investigation for interventions like what I just mentioned. And there's so many others. But I say this to say that we have talent in St. Lucia. As I said, St. Lucia is a very, very rich repository of sporting talent, irrespective of the sporting discipline. And the sooner we can get our facilities up to standard, the sooner we can begin to standardize the execution of coaching programs and things of that sort to align them with internationally accepted standards, I think the faster we will begin to see homegrown athletes being in a position where they can challenge meaningfully to give St. Lucia the kind of exposure that we need. But one thing we should never do, Calix, is to sacrifice what we have locally just to embrace what obtains overseas.
Now, of course, the challenge with sport is that there's so many different forms of sport around the world, which persons are very much interested in. Of course, I mean, the big one of football. But when we think about it, we've got also a very rich legacy of cricket as well, although perhaps not as rich as some of our neighbors, but still, I'm sure there are lots of cricket fans in St. Lucia. Basketball has taken the hearts of a lot of persons in St. Lucia, but perhaps more so just from a spectator's perspective. And how do you balance, especially in the environment of scarce resources, how do you balance these competing sports, which are all looking for resources, all looking for that opportunity to become and to create greats?
The one thing you have to take into consideration as a sports administrator, and especially when you are head of the government's lead agency for sports policy formulation, is that not everybody in your country will have the same interest. But you also have a responsibility to streamline your resources and ensure that you deploy in such a way that they will have maximum impact in terms of which associations you give what. There cannot be an equitable distribution of sporting resources in the country, given the number of federations we have. So I think both administrations, the St. Lucia Labour Party as well as the United Workers' Party, embraced the position where priority would have been given to track and field, cricket, football, and netball. But of late, we saw sporting disciplines like swimming, basketball to a lesser extent, and volleyball. They were really coming to the fore. The boxing fraternity, they too were doing well. And so you have to take all of this into consideration. But resources alone or money alone will not make for great athletes and for athletes to realize their true potential. You must, as much as possible, try to create what we call a sporting culture in the country. One thing that always bothered me, and even before I became minister responsible for youth development and sport, was the fact that on any given weekend, you have 5, sometimes 6,000 St. Lucians glued to their television set watching the English Premier League. But when the national team was playing at the Mindu Philip Park or the Boseju Cricket Facility, you hardly got 100 persons coming out to support. Mm-hmm. And I was always at my wit's end trying to understand the reasons for that particular phenomenon. You go into the different communities, you go into Deriso, you go to the Roseau Valley, you go to the Mabuya Valley, you go to the Wembley, Philip Monrepo, Philip Masne ground, on any given weekend, Calix. Domestic football in particular, and in some communities, cricket in Choiseul and PI, and you would have thousands of people supporting the local game. But whenever the national team was being engaged, we did not get that level of support. And I remember being in the UK on a ministerial assignment. It was during the Olympics. And there was this swimmer from England, Rebecca Addington, I think is her name. She had won a medal. And you should have seen the number of persons who had to be interviewed. Her grandparents were there. Her parents were there. Her best friends were there. The neighbors were there. It's as if an entire community where she grew up, that entire community was being interviewed. And what it really underscored for me was the extent to which communities take ownership of athletes and take ownership of talent. But in St. Lucia, you tend to get assistance only after you've made it to the national team, or somebody realizes that, hey, this person has done something that, we can that is worthy of commendation and things of that sort. But in the creation of a sporting culture, it cannot just be a case where you drive through communities with a town crier asking persons to come out and support a particular game on an afternoon. Yes, that is necessary. But you have to ensure that your playing fields and the little playgrounds, even if they're not up to FIFA standard, that they are well manicured and they're well kept. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon and 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the older person who's 65 and 70 and even 80-year-olds can go on the playing field to break a sweat. And things like that should never be underestimated, especially in pursuit of the creation of that sporting culture that I mentioned. So we still have a long way to go. We have a lot of work to do. But as I said, what is most encouraging for us in St. Lucia is that we are a country that is immensely blessed with talent, sporting talent, and talent being manifested in so many other forms of human endeavor.
And it's interesting that you're raising that again, because that dichotomy that I think is apparent, that balancing again between the local needs, or maybe even what some people may consider the amateur needs, versus the national, semi-professional or professional needs of a country. And I mean, of course, we've seen quite a lot of investment over the years into sports infrastructure, like the Darren Sammy National Cricket Ground, the George Odlum Stadium, the indoor sports facility. And now we're seeing as well investments into matters like the Soufrière Mini Stadium. But how do you strike that balance, though, you see? Because I'm thinking about...
Alex, how can you forget the Larry Slade field in the Mabuya Valley?
Well, I'm not even... we'll get to many of those perhaps a little later, or the canneries upgrades and all of those. But I'm saying that, like take, for instance, the case of the Soufrière Mini Stadium, where you had a ground which was a multiple-use facility. It was serving both cricket as well as football. And it's now being redeveloped to serve effectively football and track or athletics. But it's also had the implication of killing, well, effectively not having any potential for cricket to be played there again. And also, I understand the loss of a netball court and a basketball court as well. Striking that balance seems to be very important.
That's important, very important, Alex. And let me just say straight up that I do not want to give any of your listeners the impression that the St. Lucia Labour Party, or Shawn Edward for that matter, we are against investment in sporting infrastructure. As a matter of fact, I think our record speaks for us. It was the St. Lucia Labour Party that undertook the construction of the National Stadium in Beaufort. It was the St. Lucia Labour Party administration that also built the Beausejour cricket facility. So our record in that respect is clear, and it is there for all to see. What we have had issues with in recent times is the manner in which the government has gone about some of those projects. Deriso was a community where you had a lot of cricket being played. I mean, I've played at every level for the Mabuya Valley in Deriso. As we speak today, because of the AstroTurf project in Deriso, cricket can no longer be played in Deriso. Miku has produced some of the finest national cricketers St. Lucia has ever seen. Today, cricket cannot be played in Miku as a result of the AstroTurf project. In the case of Dennery, you have a cricket field right adjacent to the football field. So cricket is not impacted in any way with the Dennery setup. But let's go back to Miku. I taught at the Olia Combined School for approximately 7 years. And I recall before Philip Maslin was what we know it to be today, we were known as District 3 at the time. In the configuration of educational districts, we were District 3 at the time, or District 5, I can't remember. But schools from the Mabuya Valley all the way down to T. Rocher. Alex, every year, it was the Miku playing field we used to go to for our district meet. And that was one of the biggest sporting activities on St. Lucia's East Coast. Okay? Yes, the playing field was not fully grassed, but we were able to get our lanes, and we were not just exposing children to the rudiments of athletics at an early age, but also we were providing them with avenues to compete and to develop an appreciation for sport and what it can do for them as budding citizens. With the AstroTurf, that is no longer the case. You cannot have a track and field meet on the Miku field for whether it's the preschoolers or the primary school. I said earlier on that Miku has produced some of the most celebrated national cricketers St. Lucia has produced. As we speak, cricket can no longer be played in Miku. At the time of the commencement of the project in Soufrière, and I must tell you, I'm one of those who welcome the synthetic track. And if we can get more synthetic tracks on which our athletes, our sprinters can practice and compete, I think St. Lucia would be a better place for it. But when the project started, Soufrière had arguably the most vibrant cricket league, not just in St. Lucia, but in the Windward Islands. The cricket competition in Soufrière attracted international players like Andre Fletcher out of Grenada. And I think there were two others who probably came to St. Lucia to participate in the Soufrière competition. Okay? And whether we like it or not, there will always be a place for cricket in the hearts of West Indians. Whether the West Indian cricket team is doing well or not, we have that sentimental attachment to cricket, and it is not something that we can run away from. With the introduction of the AstroTurf, cricket can no longer be played in Soufrière. The government's retort has been that the land has been acquired in a place called Ruiz, I think, in Soufrière, somewhere in the vicinity of Font Saint-Jacques, I think.
I think it's, well, behind the secondary school, the comprehensive school. Yeah.
Well, somewhere in that area to establish a cricket ground. This is the same government that promised us 2 years ago that they're going to build 5 hotels, among other things. So, I don't know. I am just keeping my fingers crossed to see if that will actually materialize. But Calix, it is of no benefit to anybody for you to spend an exorbitant amount on 4 facilities. And when you drive from one AstroTurf facility to another, the little playgrounds and playing fields in between are virtually abandoned. You leave Dennery, the first facility you get when you leave Dennery Village would be the little playground in Raleigh. Now, as I said, not every sporting facility must be of international standard of size. There are a lot of us who played on just a little area that was cleared, and we were able to nurture our talents to cause us to catch the eyes of national selectors and go on to represent St. Lucia and the Windward Islands. The little playground in Raleigh is in a mess. Then you go to the sizable, arguably one of the biggest playing fields in St. Lucia, the Wen playing field. Mm. And between 2016 to now, for the greater part of that 5-year period, the Wen playing field was in a state of abandonment. And when they assumed office in 2016, Calix, they found in place a very successful and workable playing field maintenance program that was yielding results. I know firsthand what it is like to leave the Olio Combined School as a national player, and you want a knock as an opening batsman for your country's under-19 team, and you have to run to the nearby ravine with a bucket to try and wet the pitch and push the roller yourself to get the strip ready so you can get a little knock as a national player. And I said that if I was going to be the Minister for Sports in St. Lucia, that can never happen under my watch. So what did we do? With the NICE program and working collaboratively with the Ministry of Social Transformation, we established a playing field maintenance program, Calix, where every morning from Grosley to Vieux-Fort, you had close to 100 St. Lucians waking up in the morning. And their job, just as the bank managers who go into the bank to look after the finances of their customers and their institutions, those persons were leaving home and they were going to work in full-time jobs as playing field and facilities maintenance officers, so that when a man leaves work or a young child leaves school and he wants to go on the playing field for a sweat or for organized practice, the facility has already been prepared and you just jump into action to give yourself a chance at realizing your dreams irrespective of the sporting discipline. That is what they inherited. But as soon as they came in, they decided to do away with the playing field maintenance program. And I have pictures, evidence of playing fields in every constituency in St. Lucia that had been abandoned for an extended period of time. But because elections are on the horizon, people are going to move with some haste to cut the grass and make it seem as if this is what obtained for a 5-year period.
Now, Mr. Edward, help us understand, I know we have to take a break in just a little bit, but just quickly help us understand the thinking behind these AstroTurf surfaces, the economics behind them, and the playability behind them. Because, I mean, I know, of course, you were instrumental in assisting with the establishment of the FIFA Goal project, assisting through the government of St. Lucia and FIFA and the FA, that a synthetic surface down in the Mabria Valley, in Richford area.
Yeah.
So
yes, Calix. When there was a particular sitting of Parliament when we debated the sports infrastructure program being pushed by the United Workers' Party administration, and we attempted to highlight the disadvantages and whatever concerns we may have had at the time with AstroTurf being used in the temperate region. And I remember a particular member from the other side of the parliamentary aisle chided me and saying I was the one who introduced AstroTurf to St. Lucia, and today it was convenient for me to come and criticize it. When we agreed as a cabinet to relocate the FIFA Gold Project, you know that the original site for the Gold Project was at Union. And then administration changed, and Sir John, as Prime Minister at the time, said that he would have preferred that parcel of land being used for agriculture. Then Bexon was considered, and when the National Labour Party came in 2011, as Minister for Sports, of course, I lobbied cabinet, and thankfully most persons were in agreement with me that the First Lady would have been better suited in the Mabuya Valley, Grand Riviere, in the Mabuya Valley. And that is why we moved to Grand Riviere. FIFA wanted to have artificial surfaces on both playing fields. That is what they wanted. And we insisted that we were not going that way. We have fertile land, soil in the Mabuya Valley. We have no issues growing grass in the Mabuya Valley. And at no time were we going to budge and allow both playing fields to be set up with AstroTurf. And we eventually reached a compromise where the playing field to the west was laid down with the AstroTurf material, and we kept the bigger of the two playing fields as a grass surface. So for this particular reason, they've chided me to say that I introduced AstroTurf to St. Lucia, and today I am criticizing it. But you have to look at the bigger picture. There are certain parts in Europe and North America where this thing is better suited because of their climatic conditions, where people have had serious reservations. I think it was Russia, Brazil, and a few other countries. They actually initiated court action against FIFA because I think some games, Women's World Cup, were played on artificial surfaces, and they highlighted all the reasons why moving forward we should move away from those artificial surfaces. There are those who tell you that they can be cancer-causing agents in the materials being used. I know for a fact that on certain days, when the sun has been heating the surface relentlessly, you have a bit of a problem late in the afternoon because of the heat retention in the material that is being used. But as I said, we made a compromise, and we were not in favor of the entire facility being AstroTurf, and that is why today we have the bigger field still covered in grass, and you have the artificial surface on the other side. But what has happened in Miku, in Deriso, and in Soufrière, yes, you have football surfaces, but you have basically created those facilities at the expense of a sporting discipline that still has a lot of historical and sentimental value to not just St. Lucians, but people of the Caribbean generally.
Now, Honorable Shawn Edward, we're going to take a break at this point in time for our weather news. When we come back, I do want to continue to have that conversation about the economics of deciding to go towards AstroTurf around in St. Lucia. But of course, we're going to take a break at this point in time, give you a chance to get a bit of air and as well some water, and then we'll be right back after this. And welcome back to the lunchroom. We are 20 minutes away from the hour of 2 o'clock, and we're speaking with the Honorable Shawn Edward. He is the Member of Parliament for Dennery North, and as well former Minister for Youth Development and Sport. And we're discussing sport, and we're just on this issue, Honorable Shawn Edward, regarding AstroTurf. We've been hearing about the introduction of it. Of course, you explained about the FIFA Gold project there. But all indications is that it can become a fairly difficult surface in tropical countries that also experience a lot of rainfall as well. It can be very slippery, I understand.
Well, that is what the literature points to, Calix. But personally, I've had no experience in terms of the difficulties athletes or footballers would encounter utilizing such a surface. What I can speak to firsthand is the heat retention after you've had the sun beating up the surface all day.
And I understand some sort of system had to be put in place in the Grand Riviere field with
But
respect to some kind of...
Anybody who traverses the highway through the Mabuya Valley, you will notice that a number of containers were brought in on the Grenadier Plainfield, and they have been retrofitted and been altered to serve as, I think, office space, dressing rooms, and even a pumping station, I was told. As you know, the main Mabuya River, it flows south of the Plainfield. So
right.
I think the intention is to pump water from that particular source onto the surface to help regulate the temperature if situation calls for that.
But one would have thought that before going the route of, I think, spending $32 million for 4 of these or 4.5 of these types of surfaces, that maybe we should have at least tested it out a little bit first to have a pilot, such as observing what is happening with respect to the Grand Riviere FIFA project?
Yeah, but it's important for me to make the point that the government of St. Lucia did not expend monies to put in the artificial surface at Grand Riviere. That was
right.
An initiative of FIFA working with CONCACAF and the local association. Our role as government was basically to give concessions and to give support to the FA in that particular venture. But it wasn't a case where the government expended money to actually lay down the surface. I remember taking the memo to cabinet, and we had to provide oversight for the lease agreement between the government and FIFA and things of that sort.
Right, but since then we've gone out and we spent $32 million for these other surfaces, and that's what I'm trying to establish without really knowing whether it works fairly well within our context.
Well, the government brought down an individual whom they claim to be an expert in the person of Don Lockerbie. So I guess he was able to convince them that that was the way to go. They bought into whatever he was selling, and that is why today we have the 4 artificial services being laid out in the communities I mentioned earlier on. And what is also very instructive, Alex, is that the facilities have been laid down in communities that are represented in the parliament by United Workers' Party parliamentarians. So I really don't understand the rationale for it. I would have preferred having a grass surface in Miku. I would have preferred having a grass surface in Berisso, Denry South, and also in Soufrière. In the case of Soufrière, with the St. Lucia Social Development Fund, we were able to give Soufrière a very, very pristine surface, 100% grass. And I remember when we opened up that facility, or we formally commissioned the facility after a period of closure, Felix, you would not have believed that you were in the town of Soufrière. I mean, the service was absolutely pristine. It was green, and it was done by a curator who has made his mark not just regionally, but internationally in the person of Ken Crafton. Then we saw what Ken Crafton was able to do in the Mabuya Valley, in the Larry Shoes playing field. I remember the night when we formally commissioned the facility, an individual asking me whether this was natural grass or was this an artificial surface. I mean, so pristine was the surface. And I say this to say that we have the expertise. And I think my colleagues in the parliament have made the point too, that if you were to entrust the Ministry of Sports or me as minister responsible for youth development and sports with that quantum, Calix, I can assure you that I can deliver more than 4 surfaces in St. Lucia, all 100% grass, and this artificial surface.
Just a ballpark figure, like for instance, I mean, we've seen some of what you were doing during the period when you were minister. The Larry Shoes playing field, there was construction of a pavilion, installation of lighting, improvement of the surface of the playing area. About how much did that cost?
Well, you see, each of the projects we did, Calix, each one was different. In the case of Larry Shoes, we had to do land acquisition, we had to divert the waterway, we had to install lights, we had the construction of a community pavilion, and then we had to undertake drainage works and then the surface itself. So it's very difficult to tell you that this would have been the standard amount for facility. Every facility had its own challenges and the scope of work was different. One thing that the United Workers' Party has been doing, and to a very large extent, have ignored it, Calix, is when they take a picture of the dressing room in Marigo, and they tell you that we constructed that to the tune of $600,000. The persons who are doing that know exactly what their objectives are, Calix. They are wicked, they are malicious, and they only doing this to try and sully my reputation and to make St. Lucians see me in a light that I cannot identify with. At no point in time did a St. Lucia Labour Party government give anybody any contract to the tune of $600,000 just to construct the dressing room alone in Marigo. There were a lot of things that we had to undertake with respect to the Marigo playing field, the surface, the installation of a pitch, the dressing room itself. The area was quite soggy. We had to do the silting. There's a section of the access that had to be concreted. And there were a number of other things that we did. I don't have the bill of quantities before me. And in as much as I am not a quantity surveyor to actually comment and to authorize or to validate bills of quantities, I just want to say that they've been doing that for a couple of years now to make people believe that just the little concrete structure at Marigo cost $600,000. I mean, that is ridiculous. But when you are under pressure as a government, and especially when the time is approaching for you to call the elections and you have nothing to show and you've wasted 5 years, you are going to resort to such nasty strategies and tactics to try and give yourself an advantage. But St. Lucia are not as stupid as people think. I think the people of St. Lucia have been watching very, very closely. And it is small wonder that those with whom I interface daily, whether they're from my constituency or elsewhere, they are itching, Calix, to go to the polls to basically give a verdict as it relates to the performance of this government in the last 5 years.
Now, Mr. Edward, coming now to the issue of what has transpired quite recently with respect to the Football Association. They, of course, came out eventually after being pressured after a protest of footballers outside of the office of the FA, effectively showing their disdain and anger towards the FA for the non-participation of St. Lucia in the World Cup qualifiers. Well, of course, if you go on to the CONCACAF Nations League, you will see match results for countries like Antigua versus Montserrat, St. Kitts versus Puerto Rico, Suriname versus the Cayman Islands, Dominican Republic versus Dominica, and so on and so on. There are match results for all of them, but in the case of St. Lucia versus Nicaragua, no match was played. St. Lucia did not participate. I'm not sure if this is the first time that this has happened since our membership within FIFA, but how does that strike you, hearing this situation?
Alex, I must say I was very embarrassed when I heard of that particular development on Sportsmax. As you know, Sportsmax is a media house that operates from Jamaica, and I think it is fair to say that they happen to be the lead media house as it relates to sports coverage in the Caribbean. What has happened, Calix, is regrettable. It is unfortunate. It is embarrassing for our country, St. Lucia. Now, people have been asking me from last week, people were asking me to break my silence, and they needed to hear the Labour Party's perspective on this. And I have to say to a few of them, I don't believe we should rush in and issue a statement. You have to allow this thing to play itself out and make an objective assessment before a statement could have been issued. But, Calix, what I found very disturbing was when the government came out from very early to try and recuse itself. They tried to absolve themselves. They tried to move themselves from the situation and say, hey, we had absolutely no part in this. And I'm saying I believe this is wrong. This is wrong. In as much as I don't believe the government was responsible for St. Lucia not participating, you have a full-fledged Ministry of Youth Development and Sports. The Ministry of Youth Development and Sports today has an even more robust administrative structure than what I had between 2011 and 2016. there is a minister. The minister has a personal assistant. There is a permanent secretary. There is a deputy permanent secretary. There is a director of sports. There is a director of youth. I did not have all those persons working with me. It was myself, the permanent secretary, and a director. And this never happened on this. And whereas the government is not responsible for the FA not filling a team, I am saying that the government of St. Lucia should be providing oversight for the programming of every national sports federation, so that when developments like this begin to manifest themselves, the government has to move in to avert it, so that the embarrassment that all of us have to live with today would not have happened. And that is my issue with the government.
But from a governmental perspective, I mean, you being there as minister, surely there would have been some sort of system in place where you monitor participation in international events.
Every quarter, we were meeting with the different federations just so that they could let us know what they were doing, what the challenges were. We were working hand in hand with the different federations, be it cricket, football, track and field, netball, boxing, swimming, volleyball. That is the only way you can know. You cannot, and people talk about FIFA regulations make it difficult, or it is strictly prohibited for government to be involved in the day-to-day runnings of the association. Alex, providing oversight does not mean that you are dictating the day-to-day operations of the association. You know, as a matter of fact, if you attempt to influence team selection and dictate the day-to-day affairs of the operations, I can tell you that will be met with some abhorrence from FIFA, and rightly so. And nobody's asking the government or saying that the government should have been there to ensure that the team was selected and things of that sort. No. All we're saying is that the government should have been working. The government should have been monitoring. The government should have been providing oversight to know that such a development was on the horizon. And the only way the government could have known that would have been by working with the St. Lucia Football Association. Calix, when I was the Minister for Youth Development and Sports, associations had issues to host. Associations had issues to get their teams out of St. Lucia to go and represent our country overseas. And on several occasions, at the 11th hour, we had to step in as the ministry to find the resources to fly cricket, the ladies' cricket team to Trinidad. I recall Fortuna Belrose being my permanent secretary. And when the pressure started mounting, we had to host the junior under 16 netball competition in an environment where resources were scarce. She engaged C.O. Williams and through the National Lodges Authority, for which I've been excoriated, we were able to raise the money to pave the VG Sports Complex to host the region's premier youth netball tournament. It wasn't a case where we were doing our own thing and they were doing their thing, and at the 11th hour, somebody would call the Caribbean Netball Association and say, you know what, St. Lucia can't host. And then for St. Lucia to be badmouthed everywhere in the Caribbean. No. And there was another instance where we were hosting international cricket. And whilst the Beausejour cricket facility was not available to the Football Association, we had to get Philippe Maslegrand into a state of readiness so that we could have hosted the Windward Senior Football Tournament.
Now, that's one of the matters I think that was raised in the press conference. We could not just
leave it to the Football Association.
Right.
And while all of this is happening, not a word, not a word, not a word from the Minister for Youth Development and Sports.
Well, I understand he's out of state.
Calix, you don't have to be on. Yeah. Calix, you don't need to have a physical presence in St. Lucia to discharge your ministerial functions.
In fact, ironically enough, I think he was actually stating that he was going to be attending.
People were chuckling on Sportsmax, speaking about St. Lucia. And as you quite rightly said, look at the results. Montserrat, Dominica, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And where are we in all of this? I don't feel good about it. I know what it is like, to put on national colors and represent my country. My son has done it. I have friends who have done it. And we have to do whatever is necessary to ensure that we continue to inspire young St. Lucians in the different sporting disciplines to go out there and represent their country proudly. Now, people have said to me that I chided the government for the statement they made, and I never blamed the Football Association. If we have to talk about the Football Association and associations generally in terms of governance, it will take us an entire month of Sundays to do just that. Of course, the Football Association dropped the ball. But I don't think it is my place as a shadow minister for youth development and sports to get into the affairs of the Football Association. Yes, I will agree they dropped the ball badly. But I'm saying it is equally bad for the government from very early o'clock in the crisis to come and say that, look, we are absolving ourselves from blame and responsibility. On page 553 of the estimates we just debated in Parliament a week ago, only the Athletics Association gets more money than the Football Association. So if as a government you're going to put money in the Football Association, you have a responsibility, not a favor, to provide oversight and know what is happening in the Football Association, so that the dreams and aspirations of young footballers would not be crushed.
Well, there certainly was
the way that they've been crushed.
There certainly was a lot of interest in the Football Association
and
back when
I can well understand why the footballers were behaving the way they did. Some of these fellas were looking forward to playing those matches, Calix. That is where the scouts go to in search of talent. Who knows how many St. Lucians would have gotten an opportunity to probably have a trial stint with a Premier League side or an MLS side or a team in another European country. You do not know, and they have been deprived of that opportunity. Yes, the Football Association dropped the ball. But as a shadow minister for sport, as somebody who's in the policy, I am saying that the government was too quick to come and say, fellas, you know what? That has nothing to do with us, we're not part of this. You have to be. You have to provide oversight. And when I was in the Ministry of Sports, to the best of my recollection, I know we had an officer who acted or served as a liaison between the ministry and each of the national sports federations. So how could they have not known? You're not interfering in the daily affairs of the Football Association, but you should be in a position to say, look, the Football Association is going to do a particular thing, the consequences of which will hurt our country, hurt our young people, and we're going to step in as government to say to them, look, not take over, but to bring them to the table as we did when we were in government and to look for a solution. As we speak today, young footballers are hurting. So when you see the captain of the national football team comes out and he's on talk shows and he's doing a live on Facebook, not because he wants to stir up any kind of controversy or rumor, he's hurting. And he's probably one of the few who can muster the courage to come out and speak. And I'm saying government has a custodial responsibility and role to ensure that if associations are going to drop the ball or are going to encounter difficulty, that it does not impact the young people of our country in the way that we see our young footballers are being impacted. But you know what I don't understand? Double standard. You heard the presidency of the Football Association say that it was difficult to get a venue. Alex, we had venues for the horses, The horses that were flown on the biggest cargo aircraft I've seen in my lifetime from Miami to Vieux-Fort. I cannot mention curators here because it would be a breach of things we discussed confidentially. But they told me that they were working 24 hours round the clock to get the horse racing facility ready so that horses could gallop. And you're telling me a few months thereafter, we don't have a venue for our national football team to train. And if somebody comes and highlights that this is politics, and you don't like the fellas, where are we going with that?
And of course, I mean, that was one of the major issues that was raised, that somehow there was not a ground or venue for actual play. But isn't that not also the issue that we're facing, Mr. Edward, that there are no consequences for anybody, not for the government or for administrators? And it seems as if the only persons who end up really hurting are the players, are the fans.
And that is what I'm saying, Calix. That is what I'm saying. That is where you cannot even look at that within the realm of just football. But the psyche of a nation has been affected by what has transpired. And people tell me, but boy, the problem is Cooper and the problem is the Football Association. Alex, ever so often, the affiliates of the Football Association have an opportunity to decide who will govern their affairs. It is not for me to tell them who they should vote for and who they should vote for or who they should vote against. But to the best of my recollection, Cooper won very handsomely. Let us see what happens the next time that elections are called in the Football Association. Let us see who they're going to choose to look after their affairs. So I'm not too preoccupied with the internal dynamics and the internal politics of the football. All I'm saying is that if you are going to have a full-fledged department of government providing oversight with respect to national sports federations, I'm saying somebody should have seen this coming.
Mr. Edward, in another country like in Brazil, for instance, had this happened, one would have been perhaps calling for the resignation of the sports minister.
I think you've been nice.
Well, we've seen, of course, like in the past. I mean, he's not present in this one. Perhaps he has, of course, good reasons for being overseas at this time. I understand. I think he's attending a funeral. But we also didn't see him being present even when the FIFA president was being escorted by the Prime Minister back in August of 2019. It seems as if he's not very present in this portfolio.
Alex, I'm always reluctant to criticize my predecessors and my successors in positions. But what my issue really is, in relation to this particular impasse with the Football Association, is the fact that somebody should have picked that up before it matured into what it eventually became, which is a huge source of regional embarrassment for St. Lucia. That is my issue.
And you don't buy the excuse of COVID-19?
I would buy. So, Alex, wait a minute. St. Lucia was the only country with COVID. So all the other countries that played yesterday and last week, they didn't have COVID?
And the explanation that there was an attempt to try to get people from the outside, St. Lucians from the outside, that didn't materialize. Should a national team from St. Lucians right here have been fielded instead?
And sometimes you have to exercise a lot of patience with some sports administrators. I mean, some sporting disciplines that they only exist in name. There's nothing happening. Some individuals run associations from the trunk of their vehicles, and there are others with office space and whatnot. The majority of sports administrators in St. Lucia are doing this on a voluntary basis. And that is why it is so important for there to be that nexus, that working relationship, that collaboration with government. It is something that has to be ongoing. Because at the end of the day, Calix, the government has a responsibility to safeguard the interests, the aspirations and the dreams of young St. Lucians. It is not enough to just say that the association faltered. Of course they did. So what about these young footballers who are hoping that, look, this is going to be my year when a scout would have found favor with my performance to give me a break? That has been dashed. And to say that we were not a part of it is not enough. I will not accept that, Calix. Yes, we have to take a very close look at the internal affairs of the Football Association, but albeit from a distance. But what we have control of is the relationship we cultivate as a government with the different sports federations. We put monies in the budget for them. Grants and contribution, I think, is a section of the estimate where you will find what we give to the different associations. You're supposed to be meeting with them on a regular basis. When we were there, we were meeting with them on a quarterly basis. We may not have been in agreement with some of what they were doing, but we couldn't say we did not know what they were doing. And the only way you can do that is to be engaging them all the time. And I'm saying if there was any degree or level of oversight and collaboration, St. Lucia would not have been embarrassed, and people would not be chuckling at the mention of our name on Sportsmark. We have worked hard to create a reputation in sports regionally, and I'm afraid it has been damaged. And Calix, I believe all sports-loving people in St. Lucia should lend a hand to ensure that we resolve this particular impasse at the soonest and ensure it never happens again.
Honorable Shawn Edward, we're going to have to end it there. Thank you so very, very much for your time.